And today is another long day, and thank you very much for bearing with us. We started off with a keynote address by Mr. Robert Ward, and then we had another session. And in this session, we would like to look at the other aspect of economic security, which is technology. In May, the new act, the Economic Security Promotion Act, has been established and legislated. And it is mostly to do with supply chain and procurement. But then the patents, non-disclosure, as well as trying to promote economic security, more on a security issue, how to manage and control technology and try to develop necessary technology. Rather than autonomy and independence, we are looking for strategic the necessity and how to preserve the strategic necessity. So we would like to rather look at indispensability rather than strategic autonomy and trying to preserve and protect this. What should we do and what should we think about? So I would like to invite the three panelists to discuss on this question. And as was introduced earlier, from WIWS, we have the senior fellow, Ms. Koshino, as panelist. And Ms. Koshino, before the IOG that has been established, she was Matsumoto Fellow at the API, and she was sent to WIWS, and she was now employed by WIWS. So what do we have actually aimed for and looked for? She has been quite actively being able to work closely and be able to become a distinguished researcher at WIWS, as we have hoped that she would become. She is looking at technology and 5G and these specific technology areas, and I'm sure she will be able to share with us the findings and knowledge that she has been able to accumulate. And sitting next to him is Mr. Kusakabe from Mitsubishi Electric. And as you may know, Mitsubishi Electric in Japan, before all the other companies, Mitsubishi Electric has established an Office for Economic Security, and Mr. Kusakabe has been designated to be the head of this office to look at economic security. So the CGO training and development program is what we are trying to create. So even before going through our program, he has already become the chief geoeconomics officer. And he used to be with the Minister of Economy, Trade and Industry, also specializing in this particular sector. And from practical point of view, he is now with the private sector to look at this particular issue. And we very much hope that many people will follow suit after his model. Lastly but not least, he is not the last person, if I may say so, is Mr. Onoue at the IOG. He is looking at the international order. He used to be with Air Self-Defense Force. And for the defense industry as well as security issue, on the military side, he has been specializing on this. And within our institute, for defense industry, he is looking at defense capabilities as well as technologies. And that will be the perspective that he will be introducing today. So we have these three panelists with us today to look at the strategic indispensability and how to develop and control the technology from this particular perspective. Japanese and British perspective seems to be the subtitles for the symposium today. So look from Japan, the strategic indispensability from Japan's point of view, and also from the UK's point of view. I would like to ask Ms. Koshino especially to look at this particular question. So what would constitute strategic indispensability? So what is the image in this regard? And at the same time, in our relationship with China, for Japan and UK, that technology will be indispensable strategically. And what does it mean? What does it signify? That we are linked very closely with the supply chain under China. So it is not just Japan depending on China, but also China is also depending on Japan, and also UK not only depending upon China, but China is also depending upon UK. So how Japan and UK will be able to deal with China, and what kind of indispensable leverage and edge do we have over China is what we need to think about. So at the outset, I would like to ask three panelists to give us the initial remarks and then have question and answers. So Ms. Koshino, would you like to start? Thank you very much for a very warm introduction. To be frank with you, there are much greater experts and the senior person here, so I feel rather presumptuous. But on dual-use technology, what I would like to speak about is how United Kingdom is trying to develop and control the dual-use technology, and how is it different from how Japan is going about. Now, for UK, as was mentioned earlier, Japan has already established economic security legislation, but it is not the case in the UK. They do not have any specific legislation or any policy to be presented per se. But in trying to create close partnerships and cooperation, supply chain resilience is focused upon, but control and development of dual-use technologies in the past. We look into the history as the growth of economy and security issues are closely linked with each other, and that is something very true. And how UK government has been trying to formulate its policy, there seems to be some alignment with the Japanese government. The two important concepts of strategic indispensabilities and autonomies, these are also relevant to UK as well. What is the approach of the UK government vis-a-vis the cutting-edge technology, and specifically in respect to the US-China contention and the competition? And in March of 2021, there is an integrated review being announced by the UK government, and that science and technology is being rightly put at the center of the issue of the foreign policy as well as security policy. And the Indo-Pacific has been focused upon, and the relationship with China was focused upon, but from the strategic environment, that this is a competition of the different regimes. That is how it has been positioned, especially with China is a competitor in terms of political regime. That has been notified. And science and technology sector is, from page 1, is given as the arena where the competition of regime is happening. Now, science and technology, in that document of integrated review, that the strategic supremacy must be maintained politically as well as from security point of view, that it is a standard of the measurement and to try to shape foreign policy. Therefore, for UK, the strategic supremacy and the competitive supremacy must be given as top priority. And there are two pillars being indicated. And the first pillar is science and technology power needs to be built and be maintained. And secondly, a responsible the cyber power capability must be fully established and positioned. So cyber is a very important arena which has been mentioned. As the science and technology have power, the specific technology is being looked at from two perspectives. First is economic the benefits, especially those who would bring solutions to the global issues. And secondly, the strength for UK, and by depending upon the sources abroad, that would also become strategic interest for UK. Engineering biotechnology and quantum as well as AI are given. Security and for prosperity, these are quite relevant and important. For these, the three technology areas, in September 2021, the announcement was made. The new US, UK, and Australia, the AUKUS, in the cutting-edge technologies, these three sectors are mentioned. And in 2021 November, at the WIWS, MI6 administrator has made a public speech, and these three sectors were also mentioned by the head, by him. That these are the technology areas where adversaries are going ahead in making development. So in selecting technology areas, the UK for security and military perspective, you need to have utilization for those purposes in the three technology areas. And why the MI6 head has made a speech outside of his realm. As James Bond movie that has already been going on in the theaters, and I'm sure working with the private sector businesses are actually developing these technologies, and MI6 is asking to work with the businesses, and the access and ownership, own, collaborate, and access were also emphasized. In the supply chain session, it was mentioned, UK is not just looking for manufacturing on their own, but to maintain and also to try to preserve the access for them. So to collaborate, not just own, but collaborate, to look for partners when you cannot make on your own, to collaborate with others so that access could be ensured. And the second pillar is responsible democratic cyber power. Cyber security would be the foundation for that. For specific technology areas, microprocessors and safe system design, quantum, and other new technologies need to be developed. And own, collaborate, and access would be relevant. And secondly, the risks on depending on the other countries needs to be reduced, especially for digital technology. Rules making and standards making must be followed through judicially. And what is different with Japan is that when it comes to cyberspace under economic security, it is more of a digital infrastructure, including the 5G, that we should produce on our own and to develop our own industries. But UK, on the other hand, if they cannot really go on their own and And as soon as they realize this, and when they have decided to exclude the Huawei, they would be inviting the companies from the other countries. And through military intelligence activity, the defense as well as offensive capabilities need to be adopted in trying to protect what you own. For example, for SIGINT, like the MI6 as well as GCHQ, and also the British military, and within the Defense Department, cyber defense units have been established. So for safe infrastructure to be built is quite important, but within that infrastructure, you would also try to adapt your cyber attack capabilities as well. And then from the institutional framework, for example, investment regulations from 2020 onwards have been strengthened. And from the 1970s, from 1977, the non-disclosure of the patents have been introduced as a system, and takeover clause has also been introduced. And through 5G, Huawei will be crowded out, and there are very heavy monetary penalties involved as well, which is different from Japan. And UK is also different from Europe. Europe is looking for strategic autonomy and also digital sovereignty. As compared to EU, from UK, from those three different frameworks, looking very actively for partners. So for Japan, UK will be a potentially important partners, very easy to partner with. And from defense capability, UK is always looking for the relevant technology. So in terms of security and intelligence, in Japan, defense and the private sector seems to be separated too much, which is different from UK, and this is what we need to consider in this country.
Thank you very much. I did read the integrated review, but I hadn't the organized understanding of the review as much was just explained. It really facilitated my understanding. Thank you very much for pointing out the commonalities and differences between Japan and the UK in terms of the perspectives that they have. Next, moving on to Mr. Kusakabe. To give the opening comments. Thank you for the introduction. My name is Kusakabe. I'm with Mitsubishi Electric, in charge of economic security. My previous position was with the Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry, and 3 years ago, I was the director of Agency for Natural Resources and Energy, and then I came to Mitsubishi Electric. My first job was export controls. I was the executive officer for export controls. That was back in 2020. Back then, it was the Trump administration. And there was US-China confrontation. In the Trump administration said that they would not use Huawei technology for 5G. And we had the big discussion of what other countries would do. You remember those days. And back then, the Defense Authorization Act of the United States, that was the advance case. That was a very complicated, difficult act. From a business person's perspective, you don't understand what is written in the act. But if you really look closely, you understand. For certain leading-edge technology, new export controls will be introduced. For companies with leading-edge technologies, if you wanted to invest in such companies, there's going to be new regulations. Undesirable countries' technology with leading-edge technologies. You introduce a regulation not to introduce such technologies. That was the gist of the act. And I thought, after 2000, we used to the environment where the world was centering around WTO. There was this free trade rules, and everything was decided with discussion, including China. And as for defense technology, what's an arrangement? not to provide arms to terrorist countries. That was decided based on consultation. So that was a very simple world. But it could be that in the future, in the arena of leading-edge technologies, rules may be decided in confrontation, and the rules that companies will face may not be just one single set of rules. There could be US rules, and there could be a different set of Chinese rules. And when it gets more complicated, even on the human rights issue, whether you are violating human rights or not, in determining whether your act is in violation, the decision may be different from US or the Chinese rules. And NGOs will be asking you not to assist human rights violations. Then what do we do? Do we stop exporting to certain countries? Then if we stop that, that country may start applying pressures to us. This arises because of differences in different rules. So in the arena of leading-edge technologies, Ms. Koshino talked about science and technology, but in the leading-edge technology area, the environment of the systems that companies are faced with are changing. So what do businesses do when there is a change in the environment? We change our business structure. You start to change your business structure. There is a precedent. Before WTO has taken root in the 1950s and 60s, looking back then, free trade, in the world of free trade, there was the oil crisis. Energy-conserving technology attracted a lot of attention, and Japanese automakers did a lot of leading-edge technology development. Compact cars with higher energy efficiency cars were produced and started to export more and more. And there is a new set of rules imposed for export controls to hinder free trade. What happened is that domestic production to exports had to be transformed. You need to set up production facilities overseas to produce products overseas. So new supply chain structure was made. So Japanese automakers, if there is a market demand for 10 million cars, we stopped making cars in Japan when the rules change. But you cannot let opportunities slip between your fingers. You would develop supply chains overseas. That was what happened in the past. But similar things could happen in the future in a more complex way. That is how we at Mitsubishi Electric see things. So therefore, we developed Economic Security Control Office. It's not just export controls or materials office, not the legal division only. So this complex phenomena, in order to develop our policy at the company, we developed this dedicated office. The key word here is that in the past, when there is a conflict was over materials and products. But now conflict is over technologies. Technologies are produced by people, and information becomes key. And therefore, it's not just sufficient to just look at distribution of goods. We need to be looking at the distribution of people, information, and data. Then, for a business, technologies do have that aspect. You did have technology development strategy, but technology management strategy, did we have that? No, we didn't have that technology management strategy in the past. Then, if we are going to be centered around technology, and if there is going to be multiple sets of rules surrounding the technology, on technology management, what kind of internal system do we have in the company? We need to set up such a system. And as we heard from Ms. Koshino, countries around the world would be developing their own systems. How would they be designed? Or furthermore, it's not just at government level. NGOs and investors will be voicing their opinions. What kind of rules are they be oriented toward? We need to have a comprehensive view of that. So we're now living in a very complex world. As we heard from Dr. Suzuki, in 2020, we set up our Economic Security Control Office, and I became the executive officer in charge, and there were no other peers. In a certain company, it was the person in charge of legal was responsible for that, and in another company, a person responsible for export controls were overseeing those considerations. But as there were higher interest in the matter, the government was moving ahead, and there was the Economic Security Promotion Act. There was the initiative to develop a set of rules, and companies are starting to have many officers with the similar responsibilities like myself. So we're having a horizontal community of such officers at businesses. And we do have a hub now with the Institute of Geoeconomics so that concrete systems could be understood around the world so that we can come up with the best response at the Japanese company level. I think that we are starting to have an intellectual infrastructure. I'm very happy that I have been invited. And to the question of Dr. Suzuki, I cannot give a clear answer because we're not sure about what kind of response we should take. Of course, I expect that there is going to be difficult questions coming from Dr. Suzuki. If you ask me whether we're going to quit China, the answer would be, we don't know yet. And that is why I am in this position at the company. So when technologies are changing and when the systems are starting to change dramatically, then companies will have to change their structure. So we're having this major wave of changes for the first time in 60 years, I would say. So we're at a transition point. It could last 4 to 5 years at the shortest, and maybe over a 10-year period, we may strike an equilibrium. And the companies that have a very dexterous technology management strategy will be the survivors.
Thank you very much. Exactly as what we would like to introduce in our founding document of the IOG is the statement made by Mr. Kusakabe. And that is exactly the motivation of creating our institute, that there is a necessity and you are pushing us along. That rules are changing these days. And as the rules are changing, we cannot stay as is, as companies as well. And that, I believe, is the big change and big motivation for all of us in trying to bring a change and to bring a difference. As Mr. Kusakabe has said, those companies who will be able to respond properly will be able to survive. And if you cannot respond in a suitable manner, you may not be able to survive. So IOG hopes to serve as a hub for all of you and to try to study the rules in the different countries, and globally those rules are changing, and there are dual and triple tracks, different tracks of rules making. How to try to work in a contradicting the rules making process and try to close the gap and the differences in the different systems and institutions. I'm sorry that my remarks that may be rather disorganized and not to the point. But as I have already introduced to you earlier, Mr. Onoue is an expert on defense capabilities, and he is also well-versed on defense industries and technologies as well. So, Mr. Onoue, would you like to give us your remarks? Thank you. I was formerly commander of Air Material Command, and I retired in 2017, and I became senior fellow at API. Today, as a senior fellow of the Institute of Geoeconomics, I would like to give my views based on my past experience. We heard from Mr. Kusakabe a very clear view of economic security from a business and the importance of technology. From my viewpoint, I totally agree with that. And at the core of that, what is at the core? Why do we have to talk about strategic autonomy and strategic indispensability? That is because of the US-China conflict. In 2015, when the president was Mr. Obama,
In national security strategy, this is how it says. Stable, peaceful, prosperous rise of China is to be welcomed. This is in December of 2015, but by 2017, in December, within 3 years, under Trump administration, how it says is China and Russia, they are posing challenges to U.S. power and national interest, and they are to try peace and prosperity of the U.S. So there is a complete change, and ever since, the U.S. has imposed restrictions on technology and investment vis-à-vis China. And this is now being asked of third countries as well. So there's a lot of confusion in Japan as well, I would suppose. What Mr. Kusakabe said is totally true. We are in a transition period. In our minds, we tend to think of a liberal international order. We tend to look at things from the view of a globalized world. So we tend to think that mutual interdependence is good because that would reinforce your connection, economic connection. So the cost of starting a war and breaking that interdependence would be higher. So this would lead to more geopolitical stability. But what is happening right now is that when you have too much dependence on supply chains, that could be a geopolitical vulnerability. And the adversary would take advantage of your vulnerability. That is the kind of world that we're entering into. And therefore, the essence of U.S.-China competition is that, including supply chains, your national power, you're competing over your national power. The power of a country, we call it DIME, diplomacy, information, military, and economy. And to support that is technology. So U.S.-China competition over technology is the essence. If you look at the phenomenon in Ukraine, there are many economic sanctions being imposed, but in the end, by using military power, you need to repel the adversary's attack. You won't be able to protect your sovereignty. That is what we're witnessing. And therefore, U.S.-China confrontation at the core is competition of power, and the source of that power is technology and military power. How you will be able to suppress the other with that power is at the core of this competition. You have to have a grip on this understanding. Otherwise, as you do business with China, what kind of areas can you work with China? What kind of technical collaboration can you have with China can be understood. Because this is very sensitive in terms of military security, this area you cannot have connections with China. Those are the determinations that business people will have to make. Is there any area where we can maintain our dominance or advantage over China? This was a question posed by Mr. Suzuki beforehand. There are many technological areas that Japan has an advantage over China, but conversely, in which areas do we need to maintain our advantage and dominance? I think we should pose the question in that way. Both China and the United States have identified the areas where they should keep their advantage. For example, advanced computing, materials, manufacturing technology, AI, biotechnology, quantum, and semiconductors. They have been identified as areas where they need to maintain advantage. And if you look at the newspaper of Yomiuri newspaper, Japan is to identify 20 areas where Japan is to maintain advantage and dominance. Yes, there are many overlaps, but these special critical technology areas are quite broad. and advanced computing and materials. Inside those areas, there are many different detailed technologies. So which are the priority areas? What are the sensitive, really critical technologies? You need to go ahead and identify those technologies. The identification process itself is a very difficult work. So from two perspectives, you need to assess the criticality of different technologies. One is the US and China considering decisively critical in specific technologies. TSMC is a case in point. Japan and only a few other countries have manufacturing technology of semiconductors as well as storage batteries and materials and outer space as well. These things, the technologies that Japan currently has, or Japan is conducting research with potential development, those areas need to be identified, to be fostered and developed, and to be utilized. That is what we need to do. Especially China, where they feel they are inferior, they try to introduce those technologies from abroad by using many different means. So we need to be very sensitive to those activities. That's important. For an office equipment manufacturers, China would ask them to manufacture those products inside China because they want the technology. And European industry and commerce have identified three important technologies. Business class hospitality is provided if China sees certain technologies to be very important. They try to invite those technologies from abroad, and that will be digested by Chinese companies. And once they have competitiveness, those companies will be asked to go into the cargo space to leave. So they do this very well. They give different treatment to the status of different companies. So they use all kinds of means to try to capture and incorporate different technologies from abroad to enhance their own competitiveness. We need to have a very clear assessment of that and analyze that. That is the first thing we have to do. And emerging technologies value in military and defense. That is important. Leading edge technology that China and the US are attaching importance to is dual-use technologies, can be used in both civil and military purposes. So the essence of US-China competition is competition over military power. And if that is so, civil dual-use technologies, assessing from a defense and military perspective, controlling such technologies properly will become important. If you look at the war in Ukraine, Starlink and Google Map, unmanned vehicles, and cyber are fully utilized on the battleground. In order to fight today's wars, you need civil and dual-use technologies and equipment. Otherwise, you will not be able to prevail. So Japanese companies have this very superior dual-use technologies. If that could be stolen by the Chinese to be utilized for military purposes, that will harm Japan. We will lose self-defense force personnel. So we need to have a military assessment of these technologies to identify, extract specified technologies to be developed and fostered further. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Also, very valuable proposal and advice were given by Mr. Onoue, especially China. What kind of technology are they trying to introduce and develop? And what are these technologies? And what should we be aware of? We need some mapping of such technologies. And the second point that you made, the military value of emerging technologies, and how can we make assessment and properly evaluate, and where should we be concerned, especially in the world of export control. It would be nuclear and missiles. Those the weapons of mass destruction were mostly the sensitive technologies which were targeted in coming up with the list. But it is much more expensive. What could be used on the battleground would be the GPS, the smartphones, which are close at heart within our own livelihood. These are being made into weapons on the military battleground. So that is what we need to be aware of. I would like to thank the three panelists. Very suggestive advice have been given. To protect our technology is not just based upon economic rationale or the reasons of economic sphere, but by protecting our technology, there are certain values in terms of security and the military arena. We need to have a comprehensive assessment of technology. Unless we adopt such a perspective, we cannot really protect and preserve our technology. It is not just companies' profits are involved. It is not just economics. You need to look at the industry as a whole in this country. There will be societal responsibility and relevance. And it is not just government to legislate a law and make rules and try to control over the situation. That the government should take on the responsibility and the companies should also take on responsibility. It may not be reflected into their revenues and profits. But if not, there will be reputational risks involved. There could be criticism from the public. Unless you act responsibly, you would be bashed by the general public. So it is not just free trade, and you should go for profits and trying to look for optimum place to produce, but look from different rationale, be it from security reasons, or be it for the preserving the technology, or is it more of economics? You need to have more multifocal point of view in looking at this issue. And that was readily understood by all of your comments. And I would like to thank the three distinguished panelists with a big applause. Thank you.